I'm going to introduce Valerie Estess. She co-founded the Project ALS, which has raised over $70 million for scientific research and changed radically our approach to ALS and the related Alzheimer's and Parkinson's brain diseases that have become a health crisis in this country. As Director of Research for Project ALS, Estess motivates scientists and clinicians for competing research institutions and biotechnology to work together toward a deeper understanding of the human brain. Under her direction, in 2006, Project ALS opened the Jennifer Estess Laboratory for Stem Cell Research, the world's first and only privately funded laboratory to focus exclusively on stem cells and ALS. With her sister, Jennifer Estess, Valerie wrote the national bestseller, Tales from the Bed. We're going to talk about it, right? The memoir that inspired us to dream big, work hard, and to go deep regardless of our obstacles. The book is based on the story of the Estess sisters, Jennifer, Valerie, and Meredith, who drew upon the lessons of their youth to fight Jennifer's diagnosis of ALS at the age of 35. She has addressed professionals in nonprofit sectors, women's groups, and audiences wanting to achieve dreams that seem unreachable. It is my honor to introduce to you Ms. Valerie Estess.
Thank you. So the world. One act of empathy can change the world. This is a world that needs your empathy badly. And why? From my point of view, it's that there's a tsunami coming our way, and it's picking up steam. You may not have read about it in the newspapers, but we all need to pay attention because this tsunami is getting closer, because our world is getting sicker. As our population ages, that's a great thing. Our life expectancies are pretty decent. We live older than we used to live 150 years ago, 10 years ago. Doctors can keep us alive and kicking to do the things we love, to be with the people we love. You know, that's beautiful. One of the big sticking points, though, is that people are getting more brain disease. Is there anyone in this room who's been touched by a neurodegenerative disease? And I mean by that ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or Huntington's? Anybody with a relative, a friend, just a show of hands? Okay, that's quite a few people. But what you all should take home from this is that in 10 years, 1 in every 25 of us will have been diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease. So let me just talk a little bit about ALS, because that's why I'm here today. ALS is a brain disease. It can affect anybody from your age up through the 80s or 90s, like your grandparents or older people. It's an equal opportunity disease. It hits all genders, races, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, you name it. And what ALS does is, you could be walking around just fine today, but the way it presents itself, it's different in different people, but by and large, this is how it presents. So do you know when you're totally tired, you're exhausted, and you get a little twitch in your eye? Has anybody ever experienced? I see a light bulb there. But so ALS involves sometimes this kind of twitch, not in the eye, don't worry. I'm just, but muscle twitches. Sometimes weakness. So who's an athlete in here? You like sports. So it would be something like, all right, you're taking the ball in for a layup, right? And suddenly you fall, your leg just gives out, right? And that can happen to anyone. I don't want to cause a firestorm in here, but the truth is ALS presents kind of in that subtle way. For other people, it presents through speech, where they're talking and suddenly they begin to slur their speech. And sometimes it's just in an instant and they're like, oh, what was that? And then their speech is totally back to normal. That's another symptom of early ALS. That's kind of weird. I'm describing two very different kinds of symptoms, right? But the truth is, for ALS, we're talking about an attack on a certain kind of brain cell that we all have. And they live in each of our bodies, in our brains, but mostly up and down the spinal cord, right? Okay, so these brain cells are called motor neurons. And motor neurons are really important because what they do under normal circumstances is they take the messages from our brains and they send those messages out to muscles all over our bodies. So for example, if you want to eat one of those cookies out there, you're not going to get up now and get one, but your brain tells your motor neuron to tell all the muscles you'd need to reach out for that cookie to reach out. And when motor neurons get sick in ALS and they die, we progressively lose our ability to move, to speak, to swallow, and to breathe. It's a lethal thing. And post-diagnosis, you'd be lucky to live 2 to 5 years. Because eventually, the motor neurons that control your breathing, your ability to swallow, they're all shot. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what ALS was, and Project ALS. We recognized this problem back in 1998 when my sister Jennifer was diagnosed with ALS. She got the kind that presented with the twitches, and like she was living in Manhattan at the time, and I remember very clearly she was carrying my son in her arms and she was going for a cab and she just wiped out. You know, fast forward to Jennifer, you have ALS. She was 35. I'll get back to her in a second. But the key point I would like to make here is that Project ALS has used empathy as a strategy to change science, so that now we're closer to medicine than ever before. Now, you may ask yourselves, how can you use empathy to affect what goes on in a laboratory at like some crazy university, right? Well, it's actually kind of simple. When my sisters and I realized that Jennifer had ALS and that there was no medicine for it, we set out to find scientists who wanted to empathize with our situation and also with each other. When we got out into this field to find out who was getting closer to medicine, what we found was a bunch of scientists, like the big nerds of the class. As you might imagine, maybe some of you are the nerds of your classes, and I'd like to see you after the talk today, but they weren't talking to each other. Everybody was like very covetous. So if a scientist discovered, say, one of the genes involved in ALS, he would like take it over to his little iPhone cubicle, whatever, and not really share it with anybody. But meanwhile, little did he know that he had a colleague in another part of the country that was working on something complementary, but they never talked to each other. Empathy is what I'm talking about here. So what Project ALS did is we moved in and we said, you know, no wonder there's no medicine for this friggin' problem. Nobody's talking, nobody's sharing. Nobody's being made to meet deadlines. I'm sure you all meet deadlines in your life. Why should scientists or doctors be any exception? You know, we felt like they should be working together for answers. So we started Project ALS. I'd like to introduce the team. This is Project ALS. There's Meredith Estess, my sister, who's the president, Aaron Fleming, the associate director, and Wanda Papaye, who's the director of our social media efforts. It's cool, but so it was really empathy. So this was really fun times. Like we started in a room with these very like well-known scientists, and we made them talk to each other and show each other their PowerPoints, and you know, really made them start sharing data. And so what I can say is that 15 years later, we've made exponential progress in research, just because now scientists, instead of competing, are working on the same team. It's like, what Project ALS does is we put together a dream team, an Olympic team of scientists and doctors. Because unless we work together, folks, this stuff isn't going to get done. And I will tell you that to date, Project ALS has raised over $70 million. About 90% of every single dollar we raise goes to research programs. So where has the money gone? I just want to tell you briefly. I've told you about the brain cells in ALS that are affected, called motor neurons. Project ALS, about 12 years ago, was the first to ask the question, would stem cells help us to understand ALS and maybe develop some medicines? So I'm just going to skip to now, where scientists thanks to Project ALS efforts, can take skin from you or anyone in this room and turn it into motor neurons, the very cells affected in ALS. But like, that's profound. Think about it. So a small skin punch. I remember I was among the controls, the early control group. But it's like going, does anybody go to the dermatologist? You're all too young. But what's pretty common is when people my age go to the dermatologist, they take like a little skin punch from you. So that's all that scientists need to take now to derive brain cells from your skin. Is that trippy or what? No, come on, you guys. This has been an amazing tool for scientists in the last 5 years because, yes?
So, isn't the motor neurons in the brain?
Motor neurons are in parts of the brain, and they also reside from the top to the bottom of the spinal cord. But in answer to your question, yes, there are areas of the brain where motor neurons live, and they're affected in ALS as well. But so now, what we're doing with researchers at Harvard, at Columbia, at the Salk Institute, at Johns Hopkins, at Ohio State University, what we're doing is taking skin samples from people who have this disease, and we're starting to study their motor neurons. And we're starting to figure out why they go wrong, why they get sick. And so once you figure out what makes somebody sick, what's the next thing that you can start thinking about? Thank you. Did you say a cure? You get a prize. So now what scientists are doing, we're taking these little models of patient ALS, derived from their skin that are now their motor neurons, and we're running them through computers and machines and scanners. And we're also, at the same time, putting drugs on these cells to figure out which drugs might be helpful. So like, let's say you have a sick motor neuron in a dish from somebody who has ALS, and you hit, drug A, and it gets that cell to stop being sick. I don't know if you have a cure, as the gentleman said, but you're moving closer to the first effective treatments. Now, I'm oversimplifying, but these are really exciting days. In Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's and ALS, everybody is starting to develop these disease models of human brain disease. It's profound. It may not sound that exciting today, but one day you're going to be really happy that this research is going on. So that's one thing that Project ALS feels very proud of, because we really pioneered this model from patient stem cells. And the other thing I wanted to mention was genetics. Like, I don't know if any of you are wondering, gosh, does ALS run in families? Will I get ALS? Well, the answer is yes, and you could. So there are about 40 genes now we've associated with ALS. Some involve the inherited forms, and I'm sure if you had inherited ALS in your family, you'd probably know it by now. But there's another form of ALS, which probably affects or pertains to most of the people in this room, if not all of them, and it's called sporadic ALS. In sporadic ALS, which my sister had, you are probably harboring a certain constellation of genetic material or genes that predispose you to various diseases, including ALS. So am I going to sit here and say one of you will get ALS? I'm not going to say that. But just to keep in mind that our genetics are really important, and we have identified recently genes that would tend to predispose us to ALS. So it's just worth noting that the more we learn about genetics, the more we learn about disease, the closer we move to a cure. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just a brand new project at Project ALS. So has anybody had their cholesterol? Again, you're so young. You don't know your cholesterol, right? She knows this one. You're way ahead of the curve here. But when you get older and you go to the doctor, they take a little blood test and they tell you your cholesterol levels. And to have high cholesterol of a certain type is not good, whereas if you're high in another type, it's good, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying blah, 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 but that's really profound because cholesterol has told us a lot about human health. Now, before I said ALS is untreatable, but scientists at Columbia University have just figured out that by taking a simple blood test and measuring the level of lipids or fats in the blood, they may be able to tell you if you have ALS cooking in your body, which I just think is really wild because up until now, nobody would know if they got ALS. So this may be a new way of people figuring out if they do have it. So I just wanted to mention that, because that's, kind of ripped from the headlines at Project ALS. So I'm kind of going a little more micro. I wanted to talk about who started Project ALS, because I'm going to get back to my proposition that one act of empathy can change the world. Project ALS was started by sisters. When my sister Jennifer was diagnosed, right? Sisters rallied around her, friends, family, which was a blessing. That's an amazing thing. And the first conversations we had around the table were more about listening to each other. Again, acts of empathy around the table. We wondered who the hell were we to think that we could take on science and medicine in the name of treatments and a cure? Who the heck were we? There were other words used. But the way we got the ball rolling for Project ALS was by talking and listening. Simple conversations over the Thanksgiving table, quite frankly, at my sister Meredith's house. It was an amazing moment, because what you realize is that by opening up your ears and opening up your mouth, you can make a lot of changes. So I think at the core of Project ALS is a motivation called love, which to me is the purest form of empathy. So we started Project ALS because of our love for my sister Jennifer Estess, who was 35 years old when she was diagnosed with ALS. She was diagnosed out of nowhere, and that shocked and angered us, which is also kind of a good engine for empathy. When you feel shock or anger, it was Jennifer who really launched us. From the time she was diagnosed and told there was no medicine for her, she decided to work on stopping ALS so that no one else would have to go through it. So I just want to go back over that sentence. Jennifer was not a moron. She didn't think that medicine was going to come in time for her, because as I told you before, once you're diagnosed with ALS, you don't have that long to live. So what Jennifer decided to do was devote the rest of her life to empathy. And that was, how can we motivate the world scientists, donors, students, the general populace, to care about ALS, to work on a complicated brain problem so that no one else would have to go through it? Empathy. It's the driving force at Project ALS. So Jennifer got ALS, but what she gave from that point on was pretty profound. She inspired advocacy, conversations with the Congress, and I have mentioned progress in laboratories worldwide where scientists are now working together in the same sandbox. They may not love each other. We may not all love each other every second, but when there's a problem before us, when we can join together, we can certainly make progress, some of which I've highlighted here today. But, for me, it all goes back to Jennifer as an empathetic person. It's not like, she got sick and then she became empathetic. I think empathy is not conferred on people. I think we have to work for it. I think we have to develop empathy. And I think we have to develop it starting now, because that tsunami is really coming. I know you guys are super young and you don't think anything's going to hurt you, but I'm telling you, the neurodegenerative diseases, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, it is coming, and we have got to do something about it. So today, I urge you to ask your empathetic self what it is you could do to participate in the fight against brain disease. It may be something as simple as talking to somebody about what you've heard today, or something you read about ALS, Parkinson's, or Alzheimer's. But I just wanted to share, as I segue out of my very long talk here, into how simple an act of empathy can seem. As I said, Jennifer was actually my younger sister, so is Meredith, but Jennifer, they both teach me every day. Jennifer, by the way, passed away in 2003. She's still teaching. I just wanted to say that when I was your age, I really wanted to write, but I felt humiliated. It's really weird. I'm sure we all feel embarrassed about something. We all have our thing, right? I I can't think of anything more humiliating than writing something and then showing it to somebody, which is, like see a psychiatrist, right? Jennifer told me to write. This was the empathetic Jennifer, and this is how she changed me. She said I didn't have to write like Shakespeare, or who's your favorite writer? Throw out a name. Mark Twain, I heard, brilliant. Who said that? Prize. But what Jennifer said to me is, all right, so maybe you don't write like Mark Twain or Shakespeare or Virginia Woolf. But you have to do what you love. And if you want to write, if that's what you really want to do, you're going to have to write. And to me, that was an incredible act of empathy because she saw me. My sister saw me. And she confronted me, and I wrote a book. This book is called Tales from the Bed, and it's actually Jennifer's memoir, and I wrote it with her. And it was really hard to do. Imagine what Jennifer was going through. She had friggin' ALS, okay? But for me personally, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a huge leap. But I was able to do it because of my sister's empathy. So I'm going to go back to the proposition I posed at the beginning, which is one simple act of empathy can change the world. I'm not saying that this book has changed the world, but I am saying that the behavior of one woman to everyone she encountered has changed research medicine and will eventually change millions of lives. And I'm inviting you to join us and do what you can to stem the tide of brain disease.